All right, par 4, up the Ferry farm. Oh man, wow. Got chairs.
Drink up. Drink up. Feel free to have seats. And I'll stand back here so my back's not to everybody.
I'll see you.
Again, one armchair, head of the household gets the armchair.
Wow.
We get the swamp, right? Normally we only have one table up. Again, for the holidays, we're expecting visitors, so we have, we're set for visitors to come
Wow.
for dinner, or whether we know they're coming or not. But normally
Whoa.
after the meal's done, it's about time to start eating dinner. Everyone eats dinner at 2 o'clock today, still, right? You might be eating lunch now, right? But after dinner's done and the plates are cleared, the enslaved people are going to fold the furniture up and put it up against the wall. That opens this room up for other things. Anyone fold their table up at home now? Now, I bet you guys are going to tell me something crazy like you push your chair under the table after you're done eating, right? Mom and Dad make you push your chair under the table? Yeah. No one says put your chair against the wall, right? You guys are way behind the times. So that chair railing is the reason. That you might have some chair railing in your house. It's kind of decorative today, but it served a purpose so that you didn't bang the walls as you put the furniture. But as I said, that opens the space. 18th century, they're using the space as many ways as they can. Today, we build as many rooms to a house as we can, right? So this is the dining room, it's the breakfast nook, it's the office space, it's the entertainment space. Tomorrow when it's raining, this is the laundry room. They're doing their laundry on a schedule, rain or shine. If it's an ugly day, they're going to hang it in here to dry. So as I said, you're using it as much as possible. To give you an idea of how big this room is in the house in general, kind of your frontier log cabin is about the size of this room. So this house is 2,300 square feet. No kitchen, no closets, no bathrooms.
Wow.
So it's 2,300 usable square feet of space. So for the time, it is a large house. Again, the front of the house, 2-story, the back of the house, 1-story. So you notice how big the windows are in this room compared to the other one, basically twice. Again, the room's a little bit taller. But in the front of the house, think about your house at home. Front yard's nice and clean, good landscaping, all that. Backyard. If you got 4th of July and you got people coming over, you're out there for a week pulling weeds and cutting grass and making it look nicer. They're doing the same thing. This is the side of the house that's getting seen. It faces the river, faces town. So they're going to put their value stuff where it's going to be seen. So glass and brick are the expensive part of your house. So the big fireplaces, the big windows, you're showing off that you can afford this stuff. Okay. All right. And then obviously having the mahogany, walnuts, cherries for your furniture versus pine and oak stuff. Again, you're showing off that you can afford. And the gentry is the trendsetters. They're the Joneses, right? They're keeping up with the Joneses. So you want to be the people with the latest, greatest stuff here. Okay. So the big desk, again, anyone have a standing desk at work or home? Again, if you do, you're behind the times still. Standing desks have been around forever. On the inventory, this is called an escritoire. It's probably a misspelling of what it is, but basically it's a bookcase on top of a desk. And again, Augustine married, probably George, when he got a little bit older, doing the business stuff here. Mary has a private desk in the other room that you do personal stuff. Okay. Did you have a question? The slots down at the bottom there would be for ledger books. Think of this as headquarters. Again, 6 or 7 properties, all buying, selling, trading things. those records need to be centralized. So since this is where the Washingtons are living at the time, this is headquarters. Maps for when they do travel and things like that are probably down there as well. Okay. So the office space here, personal space, entertaining space, dancing, music. This is where you're doing your schoolwork. Did I ruin it for you? Well, that's the teacher. So I said, this room is going to get used for lots and lots of different things. So again, a little bit about the house, and we'll talk about Mary and George here real quick. So again, if you look out the window, you'll notice we're right on the edge of the hill. So again, as a math teacher, this is my geometry lesson for you. The house is up here on the hill, you're down here at the river level. Why is the house here on the hill and not further back? What happens when this house gets built back here? No one sees it, right? Why are you going to build this nice fancy house and not have anyone see it? The whole purpose of building a fancy house is to show off, right? So why would you put it where it can't be seen? So it's got to be built here on the edge of the hill. Town, and again, city dock right there. Town across the river. The yellow house that you see, almost kind of directly across, is built, I think it's finished in 1769 or started construction in 1769. So Mary would have still been living here when that house was built. That is an original, the main house is original, those rooms in the back are new. So that's Mary's neighbors over there. The river is wider and deeper in the 18th century. It's about twice as wide. And if you look out the window, you'll see some benches off to the right under the one tree. That's roughly how wide the river is in the 18th century. Okay. And it's deep enough that the ocean-going ships come all the way up to Fredericksburg. So, Carnival cruises, Royal Caribbean coming right up here. Might that be great if you could catch a cruise ship here at the dock and
wow.
You can't get a rowboat. For those who remember they used to have, when I first moved here, they used to have that paddle boat that came up in the summer and did lunch cruises. Can't get up the river anymore, so that's why it's done. But don't think cruise liners and super tankers. Ships are about as wide as this room and probably not even as long as this house. But you could get on a boat in England or in Europe and not get off till you got here in Fredericksburg. So imagine being on a ship for weeks. First thing you see is this house up on the hillside. You're going to be impressed. Speaking of the river, does everyone know that that's the mighty Potomac River, right? No? But George throws his silver dollar across the Potomac River here. A couple things wrong with that story. Besides the fact that it actually happened, it wasn't a dollar, it wasn't the Potomac River. If you've been to Mount Vernon, the river's a little bit wider, isn't it? You're not throwing it across the river, you're not putting it in a can and then shooting it across the river. There's no way you're getting anything across the Potomac River. So, but that sounds a lot more interesting than a rock across the river. I mean, it doesn't. But that's what happens. Dollars are not bills, they're coins. They're actually Spanish coins, when British money's pounds. So it is rare to have actual coin money. So George would know, he's smart enough to know he's not going to throw that rare and valuable money. That'd be the same as asking Dad for a $100 bill, making a paper airplane, and say, look, Dad, I'm going to throw it across the river. Give it to me instead. I'll make sure it gets across the river. Come on. But that does happen here. The cherry tree story, everyone familiar with that? Do they still teach that in school? Do you know anything about George and the cherry tree? No? Okay, I don't think they teach that one anymore. Various camps on whether it did or didn't happen. Most people say it never happened. Some people say it did, it happened here. Some people say it did, but it actually was at Mount Vernon. But what happens after George dies? Biographies are written about him. One's from a family friend, Percy Mason Weems. writes it, but it's not until about the 5th or 6th edition of the book that that story even appears. There is no Washington family member that says it happened, so a lot of people go, that's why it didn't happen. But other people say no one has come out and said it didn't happen, so it must have happened. So, as I said, read history, read books, and come to your own conclusion. But if it did, it probably happened here. We used to have a nice big cherry tree in the garden. We cut it out, I think in 2019, because it was getting diseased. But when you go back in, if you think about it, on either side of the gate, they're starting to actually look like trees. They used to just be twigs. Those are cherry trees that we planted. An owner, I want to say in the 40s or 50s, I can't remember the year, was charging people a quarter to take a picture of a cherry tree stump on the property, saying this is the cherry tree that George cut down. So, American ingenuity, make your money any way you can. But if that story did happen, it does happen. It probably happened here on the property. So we talked about Mary going to have some financial issues, some things going on. In 1749, George is supposed to go visit Lawrence up at Mount Vernon. He's going to write him a letter that basically says, sorry, can't visit, don't have enough feed for the horse, and I'm afraid he won't survive the journey. Right? Today, that's the equivalent of, I don't have gas money, right? So, and then after the revolution in the mid-1780s, George is going to write a letter to a friend saying, I haven't had a want of money like this since I was a boy of 15 back on the farm. So I was 15 years old, would have been 1747. So after the revolution, money's tight for everybody. So that gives you an indication of how life was here where George is growing. Okay. Mary, again, we said doesn't get remarried. So to a lot of people, what's she up to? She needs a husband, right? It's typical for a widow to, especially in a gentry setting, to remarry. But she does not, as we said. So a lot of people are, what is she doing? She doesn't know what she's doing. She needs help, right? So in 1750, two of Mary's enslaved workers get into an argument, and Harry is going to kill Tam, T-A-M-E. Don't know exactly what the argument's about, but we know the court record survives. So that happened in June, July, and by September he's found guilty and hung outside of town. And we mentioned, because he is property, Virginia will reimburse Mary for her lost property. So a lot of people are, she can't keep her enslaved workers in line, she's in over her head. Then in 1753, Mary and a couple of the male tobacco growers in the area are accused of selling tobacco seconds. They're the little kind of offshoots from the main plant. They're considered trash and illegal to sell. Not that anyone today would ever think about putting like lesser quality stuff in the product. Right? No one would do that. Right? So that goes to trial. Mary misses court in 1753. Her one court date. And court is not like today. She doesn't get to come back tomorrow or even next week. It's next year before court meets again. Mary has to hire a male lawyer to represent her. The gentleman can represent himself. And you don't need a law degree to practice law in the 18th century. Right? So you've heard the term pass the bar? Today it means pass the test, right? In the 18th century, if you know what a courthouse looks like, they have the gate basically. That's the bar, barring you from going forward to the actual court side. So when you're trying a case, you got to pass the bar. Right? So, but she will be acquitted of the charges. But again, to a lot of people, that's just kind of a social mark against her. If she had a husband, none of this stuff would be going on, right? But she's determined to kind of do her own thing. So let's talk about George, right? He does something while he's can't remember, so let's, we said George's two half-brothers have been educated in London. They go to the Appleby School obviously a cooking school, right? Right in the neighborhood. And that's the teacher, me, I gotta tell bad jokes. But no, it's a business school. George probably would have gone to London for his schooling. Some people say if he would have went, he would have already gone there before he was 11 years old. So there's debate about that. But once George sees the trouble his mom's having, he realizes he's never going to get to go to London for school. He just can't afford it. And it's something that's going to bother him the rest of his life. He gets educated here on the property, but he doesn't have the same education as Jefferson, Adams, and people like that. So he feels out of place when he's around that. Again, that formal education's the sign of the gentry upbringing versus your common journeyman lifestyle. So, how many of you were sad? Are you going to be sad that you don't get to study Greek and Latin in school? Maybe. Yeah. It's called a dead language for a reason.
Learn about the Algonquian.
Yeah.
I don't know the rest. There's like 3 more. One starts with the A, I.
The Iroquois and.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those would have been the local tribes here. Speaking of the local tribes, we talked about the river. If you're from the area, you know the fall line's right around the bend of town, so that's kind of why Fredericksburg's built here. But in 1609, this is how far up the river John Smith comes on his travels. So if you've seen his map, kind of ends here, because that's as far up the river he can travel. So he's the first, European to meet the local natives here in North America. But he does come up this far. Right. So George is going to be educated here. Mary will hire tutors. There's some people that say he goes into town at St. George's Episcopal Church and studies under Reverend Mowry or Marie, however you want to say his name. Marie's Heights is named for him, or Mowry's Heights. But that's in town. No documentation says that definitely happened, but it's a possibility. Some of George's schoolwork does survive. You can go to the Library of Congress online and look it up. One of his books is his geometry work. And so I happen to teach geometry, so it was interesting to see that. And I can tell kids when they say, I can't do this, oh, look, George did it without calculators. But yeah, so he does get his schooling here. When George is, shortly after his dad dies, probably 12, 13 years old, he's going to copy a book called The Rules of Civility and Decent Behavior. All right, looks like this. Again, it's basically a penmanship activity for him. If you've seen 18th century writing, everyone has beautiful handwriting. There's not a doctor around in the 18th century, right? No one has doctor handwriting. The book itself originates in 16th century France, so it's about 200 years old when George is copying it. Some people think he's copied it, he's coming up with these rules. But it's going to be his guideline for how he treats people. My favorite is the end of number 12. The first part's good too, but the end of rule number 12 basically says, when speaking to someone, do not bedew their face with your spittle because you're standing too close to them. I can tell several of you have not read this book. Because one of them says, while seated, your feet should be firmly on the floor. Do not cross them nor tap one on the other. We're talking about you for weeks. And another very important, well, let me talk about some of the other ones and I'll talk about the very important one last. There's stuff like don't read over someone's shoulder. If someone comes late, don't exclude them from the activities. Don't laugh at someone's physical affliction, things like that. But a very important one, and you do not want to be talked about for missing this one. If you find lice on somebody, do not pick it off them in public, take them into a private area first. So just keep that in mind. You don't want the town talking about you for that. Ooh. That went on for years. But as I said, that's going to be his guideline when he becomes General Washington, when he becomes President Washington, how he's going to interact with people. So he's learning that here on the property. He's learning his horseback riding here. He's considered one of the best horsemen in the colonies when he grows up. When he is 16 years old, he purchases, we have records of him purchasing dance and fencing lessons. So you guys are doing your dancing, right?
You're doing your dance lessons?
No. You're not going to get very far in society without knowing how to do the minuet and stuff like that. So again, a gentleman is expected to know how to dance, and George is considered a pretty decent dancer. Okay? In fact, he's going to meet Mary, or Martha, at a party, basically. Okay? When he's 14, he purchases some books, one of which is a biography of a German soldier, a Hessian, basically. So he has an interest in the military. We said Lawrence has been in the British Navy. George actually tries to join the British Navy. Did you guys know that? So we could have never heard of George Washington had he succeeded. After Augustine dies, Lawrence kind of becomes the father figure for George, and he wants to do a lot of the same things that Lawrence has done. So he has this idea, kind of Lawrence probably encourages him to join the British Navy. Mom finds out and says, not happening on my watch. Right? So as a result, he becomes a surveyor. So George gets his first job at 14 years old. So you only got a couple of years, you better start thinking about what you want to do. We're not talking emptying the dishwasher and stuff like that. Out in the fields working. So George becomes a surveyor. Lawrence is married Anne Fairfax. So Fairfax people, here's your connection. Fairfax County, Fairfax City, Fairfax everything in Northern Virginia, right? They own a little bit of land. Your house is what, maybe a quarter acre, half acre, maybe an acre? They own just a little bit more, like roughly 1 million acres. So Lawrence gets George hired to survey some of that land out in the Shenandoah Valley. So at 14 years old, George has got his first job. When he's 17, he's going to be appointed the surveyor for Culpeper County, west of here. It's a fairly new county at the time, so it's his first political position. Again, as a gentry man, he's expected to get involved in politics. Okay? So he's trying to make his connections, and he's using the Fairfax name and connections to boost his standings in society, basically. Okay? When he, since I've been skipping around from the usual order, when he's 20, he's going to join the Masonic Lodge in town, and at 21, he becomes a Freemason. One of the artifacts they found was a pipe with Masonic Lodge symbol on it. George is not a smoker, but it could have been a ceremonial piece that he owned, probably one of the other Masons that had come to visit. And speaking of artifacts, the jug up there in the middle, with the little bearded man on the neck, it's called a Bartman jug. Popular in the early 18th century. We have one, or parts of one, in the visitor center right now. So if you go down the archaeology hallway, all straight down, there's a window there. Basically the neck and a little bit of the jug itself is getting found here on the property. So when we can, we incorporate what we found here into the furniture and things like that. Okay. So Mason, connection to the Mason. George will join the militia around 17. He'll get sent out to the Ohio Valley, the Pittsburgh area. Him and the soldiers run into a group of Frenchmen. Words are exchanged, shots are exchanged, and a French officer gets killed. So again, depending on whose version of history you want to read and believe, George starts the French-Indian War. Yeah. He had nothing better to do as a kid, right? Let's start a war. It was going to happen, but that's kind of the last straw between the two countries. Okay? So George will spend a lot of time out there while he's living here, and once he moves to Mount Vernon, he'll go back to General Braddock, Fort Necessity. All that is out in what is now Pennsylvania area. Okay? When George is 19, he and Lawrence go to Barbados. He was ready for a trip, especially this time of year, right? You got money to send us all to Barbados? You been to the Caribbean ever? No? All right, grandma's grandpa, just in case.
We're still
I know. It's the only time George leaves the colonies. Unlike some of his contemporaries, he does not spend time in England and France or Europe at all. He's here in the colonies, okay? So Lawrence is ill, so they think the Caribbean air is going to help his condition. So they go down in late August, late summer. George gets smallpox. So again, real tough question here. Does he survive? I get people that say no, and they say, all right, tour's done. Nothing else to talk about, he's dead. But yes, he survived. So again, lucky for us, he does survive his bout with smallpox. But as a result, once the revolution does start, he will have the army inoculated for smallpox. Kind of the first mass inoculation in history. So, and it reduces, trying to remember the numbers, from like 27% down to 8%. So in some cases it does save the army.
Did the Indian win? Did the Indian
French and Indian War?
Yeah. Did the Indian win? For the first
Well, the Native Americans, let's be politically correct now, were fighting on both sides. So there's certain tribes fight on the French side, certain tribes fight on the English side. But the colonists in England wins. And that's what drives the French out of North America, the United States area. They're going to be in Canada and Louisiana. So George has a pretty busy time here for the 16 years or so that he's officially living. So Lawrence isn't going to get any better. He's going to die in 1753, which is going to bring us back to Augustin's will. So remember in the will, he left that property to Lawrence because he was the oldest child. But there's a condition to it. What happens if Lawrence doesn't have any heirs when he dies? Again, it wouldn't be uncommon to die at a young, suddenly in the 18th century from some disease. So they said he married Anne Fairfax. They have a daughter, but she's going to die around 5 years old. Anne is going to die in 1761. So Lawrence has no heirs. So that property just doesn't come on the market for anybody, right? So in the will it says it goes to Augustine Jr. because he's the next oldest, right? But Augustine Jr. has to give up Pope's Creek. Remember, this will's written 20 years earlier. Things have changed. For whatever reason, Augustine Jr. doesn't want to move. He's been there 20 years. He doesn't want to pack up and move. Think about it today. Once you're in your house for a while, you don't really want to move. Sometimes you got to, but if you had your choice, you probably stay just because it's easier, right? So George is the next oldest son. It passes to him. There are no conditions on George having to give up this property because he was 11 years old at the time. All right? So that's how George owns Mount Vernon. He's living there since 1754. Shortly after Lawrence dies, he starts living at Mount Vernon. He's renting the property. He gets married to Martha in 1759. They're living at Mount Vernon. Don't own it. They're renting. Right. It's not until 1761 that he officially owns the property. Right. Questions about George? So you got a lot to catch up on in the next few years, huh? So you want to be like George, right? He wants to be like Mike, he wants to be like George. Other than, well, even money-wise, when George dies, he's one of the wealthiest people in America. So you can strive to be like George too. All right. Alright, so I'm gonna let you go upstairs. There's 2 rooms, nothing fancy up there because no one in the 18th century would go up there other than family members. So they're not gonna put fancy furniture or anything like that upstairs because no one's gonna see it. But there are beds, it's kind of like the one you saw in the corner, the basic, what are called low poster beds. This room over here has some surveying equipment in the window. On the inventory, it's listed as a lumber room. Lumber in the 18th century means odds and ends. So it's basically a storage room. It's the closet of the house in the 18th century. But the Struthers gave us money and said they wanted to be George's bedroom. George probably slept in there at some point. George has slept in every room in this house at some point in his life. But what I do want to point out, when you go into what we would call the hallway, it's called the passage on the inventory. The door under the steps would not have been there in the 18th century. You know, J.K. Rowling didn't write Harry Potter, so there was no need for a room under the stairs, right? But we put that in so you can look down into the basement. The dark stones you're going to see at the bottom of the wall, that is original foundation that survived. So that's the only thing original left to the house. Just watch when you lean over, the stairs are at an angle, so we had a lot of people bump their heads, so just be careful. If you don't want to go upstairs, we're going to meet across the hall in the park.
All right, guys, we're gonna move on to the next part. Goodbye. Bye, 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 bye. Bye. All right, bye, guys. See you in part 5, I think.